saddle height and what is the perfect saddle for a person?
I guess for saddle height, the first thing to do is make sure your saddle's level, Chris, because it wasn't. Assuming you've got a level saddle, the main thing you want to look at is how you move through the pedal stroke, from all the way from your back, pelvis, obviously knee, and then all the way down to the foot. And whether that's smooth, whether you're getting good power transfer, whether you're getting a huge dead spot in your pedal, whether you're overreaching, whether you're wobbling a lot on the saddle, there's loads of different aspects that you want to take into account when you're thinking about saddle height. There are loads of like online methods or formulas or calculations that you can do that are all over Google and YouTube to get a ballpark saddle position. And that's fine, but that's all it will be. It will be an average saddle position for you, and really we need to be a bit more specific than that if you're going to do large amounts of riding, regular riding, or you've got some sort of ache or pain or problem. With Chris, we're going to get him on the bike, have a look at how he pedals, analyse it, and then take it from there. Okay, so we just had Chris riding and taking a bit of footage on here, and the saddle is definitely too high for what Chris needs. We've measured his knee angle as the sort of the first thing to look at. I don't tend to fit to numbers. I think there is no magic number. Everyone's ideal is very different. The way I use the numbers is just to measure the change that we're having and measure the effect of the change. Having said that, as numbers go, this is a really wide range of knee extension. So Chris's leg is really overextending down through the bottom of the pedal stroke. The other thing that we saw when Chris was riding was that his pelvis was really moving from side to side on the saddle. So as he was pedaling, there was a big tilt on every single downstroke on that side. Basically his leg is extending as far as it can, and then his pelvis is tilting to try and accommodate that a little extra. We've also got a big toe down position at the bottom of the pedal stroke here, which is another indicator that your saddle might be too high. So we're going to lower his saddle now, have another look at this and measure the effect.
So shifty Jack in the corner.
We've moved Chris's saddle down a fair amount, probably 15-20 mil, something like that. And now we've got a much more comfortable bend at the bottom of the pedal stroke for him. Pelvis is doing a lot less on the back of the saddle, a bit more stable, and the foot at the bottom of the pedal stroke is now flattened off, but not to the extent where he's completely flat-footed. We've still got a nice little paddle through the bottom of the pedal stroke. Those are the things that you want to have a look at really, and obviously they're very difficult to look at yourself. But the other thing that affects saddle height greatly is saddle setback. Essentially, the further forward you have the saddle, you're moving your hips closer to the pedals, which means your leg will not have to extend as much to travel the same distance, and vice versa. If you move the saddle back, then you're extending your saddle height basically. So if you move one thing, either the setback or the height, it's likely you'll need to adjust the other thing, depending on how much you're moving it. But like I say, you really need to consider saddle height and saddle setback together as a whole, rather than individually. And then, without making things too complex, as soon as that saddle setback changes, you're affecting the reach of the bike to the front end. So you might need to consider that as well. With this bike in particular, again, this is Chris's CX bike, so he is going to be doing some CX races on this. For CX racing in general, you want a little bit more weight over the rear wheel for traction when you're going through those really muddy sections and steep, sharp inclines. So we're going to move this saddle backwards, which is going to be different, in a slightly different position to where he has his road bikes and obviously mountain bike. So we're going to do that now and then remeasure the saddle height to make sure it hasn't changed, and if it has, we'll adjust the saddle height afterwards.
Right, Dan, how do we find the best saddle for anyone ever in existence?
This is an impossible question. This is not fair. I think it's quite obvious that there is not one saddle that fits everybody and is comfortable for everybody and is perfect for everybody. The way that each brand markets their own saddles is, you could read every single one of those and think, oh, that is the perfect saddle for me. I think the first thing is your saddle has to match your riding position. You should never change your riding position to make a saddle comfortable. A large amount of saddle pressure and saddle comfort comes from the tilt of the pelvis, the amount of physical pressure from your body on the saddle, which is all affected by the riding position. So once you've got your riding position, it's about what you should feel from your saddle. No saddle should be uncomfortable. Like even after long distance, you shouldn't really be wanting to stop the ride because of your saddle, or in pain or have physical saddle sores from your saddle. Saddles should be supportive and comfortable. One of the big myths is that saddles they look uncomfortable. Of course they're going to be uncomfortable. That's not the case. You should be comfortable at your saddle. A really powerful tool that we use in the Fit Studio is this Gebiumized saddle pressure mapping. This is a cover, essentially, that goes over the saddle. You sit on the bike, ride the bike, and we can see how you're interacting with that saddle. So not only does it give us the amount of saddle pressure and show us where you're sitting on that saddle, we can also see how you move on the saddle. So we can analyse how your pelvis tilts and rocks and what your centre of mass is like and where it is on the saddle, and then obviously test different saddles to see what the differences are between different aspects of saddle. This bit of the front doesn't fill me with joy. This is fine, and you've got a nice channel, but then this contact at the front, we don't really want that. The width's fine, cut out fine, but this would be looking at like a different shape. So we'd be wanting to find a different angle of attack into the nose of the saddle. So this one tapers off very gradually and it's more of like a triangular shape.
Yeah.
Looking at that, I'd probably want to try a slightly longer nosed saddle or a narrower nosed saddle so that you're taking away the ability to put pressure out on it. So this red line in the middle and this white line, the white line tracks your centre of mass as you pedal, and then the red line is the average. Okay. Of that centre of mass. You're very symmetrical in terms of left and right. Your pressure's right in the middle, and on this particular saddle, this short nose saddle, around the centre mark of the saddle, the centre point of the saddle, that's where you want most of your pressure, on that V section. That's absolutely fantastic. Where your pressure is on your sit bones, perfectly fine, nice and symmetrical, right on the areas of the saddle that you want to put out the pressure on. But these two areas at the front, if we can try and reduce that pressure or even take it away, then that would be great. So let's say you sit really upright with your pelvis and back, so your spine's basically in a straight line, then you will sit on the two biggest areas of the pelvis, like the sit bones. Ischial tuberosities is their like proper name. So when you're looking at saddle pressure, you want to see something very different to if you were looking at someone riding in a very aggressive position, where you've got a very different contact area. Let's say if we were looking at saddle pressure for someone who does sit upright, we'd just want two blobs of pressure around the back end of the saddle and basically nothing else. When we're dealing with a more aggressive position through the pelvis, which you ride in, then we're looking for contact on these areas of the saddle. So more towards the pubic bone. And that would show as sort of two diagonal areas of pressure around the middle of the saddle. So on this saddle in particular, which is the road version of what Chris is running, we want to see contact around this V section here and here. And that's again about it. With Chris, we've got that contact on the V section of the saddle, but then we've also got contact up here. Not as much, but it's definitely getting there. Like there's still quite a lot of pressure there. So if we can find some way of reducing that, then that would be a good thing. I think a really important thing is that there are characteristics of saddles that exist amongst a vast variety of different brands and models of saddle, and it's about finding out what characteristics of saddles suit you. What width do you want? Do you want a cutout or a channel? Do you want a flat profile saddle or a wavy profile saddle? Do you want thick padding or thin padding? You really want to find out a few of those things so you can narrow down your selection, because we all know there's hundreds and thousands of different saddles out there. And then the other benefit of doing this is that it's very hard to test saddles without buying them first. Lots of people come to the studio who have tried like multiple saddles, 7, 8, 9 different saddles, all at over £100 a time, and they've spent a lot of time and money and effort testing these saddles and have still not found a comfy saddle. If you're in that sort of position or situation, it's quite often that it's probably not the saddle that's the problem, it could be the fit. It's very unlikely that you've tested 9 different saddles and every single one has been completely horrific. If you're getting the same problem on every single saddle, it's probably the fit, not the saddle. Loads of people measure their sit bone width. Bike fitters measure sit bone width. Lots of bike shops measure sit bone width. Unless you sit very upright on the saddle, will you sit on the sit bones. If you rotate forward into an average riding position with your pelvis, the sit bones are actually off the saddle. It doesn't matter at all really as to how wide your sit bones are. Yes, if you've got wider sit bones, then the rest of the pelvis is probably wider, and therefore as you rotate forward, this bit is still probably wider. But in terms of sit bone width, not many people actually sit on the sit bones, directly onto the sit bones. More people rotate forward onto the front of the pelvis towards the pubic bone. So don't always go off sit bone width. Gebiumized, this brand, makes a good case for riding saddles that are either T-shaped or V-shaped. A T-shaped saddle would be something that is wide at the back and then narrows off towards the front, like a T. And then a V-shaped saddle would be something that transitions a little bit more gradually towards the nose of the saddle. T-shaped saddles, in theory, better for sitting upright on. V-shaped saddles, better for rotating forward on, because you'll sit on that V section. So that's probably a better way to think about saddles, is the shape versus your riding position, rather than purely sit bone width. Try not to fall down the rabbit hole of going through saddle after saddle and spending hundreds or thousands of pounds sometimes on multiple saddles and not really getting anywhere. If you find yourself going down that route, then it's definitely time to speak to a professional and get some help. But likewise, if you're just starting out and thinking about whether your saddle is comfortable or not, come and use some technology like this and work out whether it's your riding position or whether it is actually the saddle, and then test multiple saddles and see where your pressure needs to be and how it is now. That's really the only way to be sure that you're going to buy the correct saddle the first time, rather than going through hundreds of pounds worth of saddle.